Are you rich? Chances are you never will be. If you weren't born into money, the odds of becoming wealthy are slim, and it's not because you didn't work hard enough. The truth is, the ladder we were all told to climb has been pulled up. In its place is a system designed to keep the rich on top and everyone else locked out. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we'll reveal why you will never be rich and how the game was rigged from the start. Money has increasingly been going to the top of the socioeconomic ladder for decades now, though lately the problem has gotten real bad. In 2023, Oxfam found out that of $42 trillion of new wealth created since 2020, the richest 1% got 2/3 of it. Meanwhile, the other 99% of the population got the leftovers. And if you have been grinding away at a full-time job just to cover the rent and bills in a major city, you already know building wealth or even saving for a rainy day or unexpected doctor's visit feels next to impossible. For one, wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. According to the Pew Research Center, average hourly earnings peaked in 1973 at $4.03 an hour, a rate equivalent to $23.68 in 2018. Adjusting for inflation, that means that the people today have about the same purchasing power as they did in the 70s. Why aren't wages keeping up? Well, the decline of unions, for one. Then there's an increasing amount of labor in competition for fewer and fewer companies. Independent and small businesses are increasingly run out of town, and large companies grow and merge to form even bigger conglomerates. Prominent economists from several universities calculated that since the 1930s, the share of the U.S. economy dominated the top 1% of companies that has increased to 90%, up from 70%. Meanwhile, the asset share of the top 0.1% of companies has risen to 88%, up from 47%. These companies are now running the market with an iron fist, as the competition of just a handful of corporations, an oligopoly, isn't really much of a competition at all. That is bad news for startups and independently owned businesses, which is also bad news if you're trying to be rich. After all, being an entrepreneur and building your own company from the ground up used to be a decent method to earn your way into the upper class, if you were successful. According to Brian Head, the median net worth of self-employed families at $380,000 in 2019 was over 4 times that of families of workers at $90,000. However, startup costs have increased with time because of inflation and the Consumer Price Index. The average cost of a startup is now estimated to be $40,000 for the first year, and that turns into hundreds of thousands if you want to start a brick-and-mortar store or restaurant. That means that even the ability to be an entrepreneur is increasingly tied to how much money you have available to you since birth, no matter what Instagram accounts with cigar-holding men will tell you. Perhaps that's why American entrepreneurship has been declining. The Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation found that though startups made up more than 12% of U.S. companies in 1980, by 2012 they only made up 8%. In addition, startups went from providing 4% of all jobs in the same time period to 2% more than 3 decades later. According to the Brookings Institution, the ultra-wealthy don't earn their money from jobs like the rest of us. The top 0.01% make 82% of their income from investments and businesses, nearly 60% from investments alone. Meanwhile, the top 0.001% made 88% of their income from investments and businesses, with more than 70.44% coming from investments. You know, like the investment that you don't have the money to make, and the businesses that you don't have the money to start. That's why the bottom 80% of households on average made only 7% of their money from the same sources. And part of the reason the ultra-wealthy stay ultra-wealthy is because high wages are taxed differently than capital gains, or the profit that you get off an investment. The Brookings Institution points out that the highest effective marginal income tax rates on wages exceed 40%, whereas much business income is taxed at a top rate below 30%. Dividends and realized capital gains are taxed below 25%. That means that if you work your way up to a really high-paying job, you're probably giving away almost half of your income in taxes. But if you are super wealthy with multiple investments, the government is seeing less than a quarter of that. This allows you to maintain your status as the top 0.001% while everyone else around you fruitlessly tries to fight their way up. Capital gains and similar returns from real estate assets, stocks, as well as investment portfolios are therefore a perfect wealth-building tool, and one you probably can't access unless you're already rich, as money breeds money. The alternative is investing from day one to get anywhere near those returns, but you have to start at a really young age, as you'll soon see, and that's going to be almost impossible. Experts analyzed data from Norway, and they found that the wealthiest 0.1% of households were already rich in their 20s. But more importantly, they invested heavily in equity and saved much of their income. You, on the other hand, are stuck paying for rent, bills, food, and your car, leaving, if you're lucky, a couple $100 for a couple nights out with friends and a new shirt or two. If it makes you feel any better, it's not just you. According to The Atlantic, people making over $150,000 a year keep about 40% of their income after taxes and basic needs like housing, food, and transportation. But those earning much less often have around 15% of their already small paycheck to cover everything else, and that is on a good month. However, that doesn't take all expenses into account, like healthcare and education. After those costs are covered, the poorest Americans have spent 98% of their income. That leaves only $367 in income that they could use for other things, or about $1 a day. Chances are that is not going to be turned into a mutual fund investment. And even if they somehow did put enough money together to speak with a financial advisor, the awful truth is, most advisors and firms wouldn't be interested in serving them. A report by the Financial Literacy Group highlights a harsh truth. Most financial advisors aren't interested in clients with serious money. Michael E. Kitchis, Director of Research at Pinnacle Advisory Group, agrees, pointing out that non-affluent investors simply don't bring in enough to justify the time. To most advisors, the returns just aren't worth the effort. Or as the report states, the brutal truth is that financial advisors, in order to serve the non-affluent, would have to accept a substantial pay decrease. Not to mention, financial advisors make a hefty sum and therefore tend to move in wealthy circles, where they can pick up prospective clients. If you're not making well into the six figures, it's much less likely that you'll come across someone like that, as they tend to be located outside of your network. Even if you get past all the initial financial and connection hurdles, coming from a background in which investing simply wasn't a thing is a barrier in and of itself. Amos Nabler, who has a PhD in behavioral finance and neuroeconomics, describes it as a complexity aversion, i.e. a kind of fear of investing if you've never done it before and you don't know much about it. According to him, it is the biggest barrier to building wealth for people who are not in markets or who have never invested before. For those who do invest, starting later in life, whether because it took you time to build enough income or simply not knowing how, makes it far less likely that you'll build significant wealth. One article uses the example of someone investing in a retirement portfolio with an annualized total return of 8%. If that person starts at 20 years old and invests $200 a month, they'll have $1.25 million saved away by the time they're ready to retire. If they start just 5 years later, they'll only have $830,000. Another 5 years after that, $547,000. Clearly, having the disposable income and knowledge to start investing early makes all the difference. And that puts people not born into wealth at a major disadvantage. Not to mention, the thing that everyone tells you to do to earn money in life, get a college degree, starts off many Americans' lives deeply in debt. The average federal student loan debt is around $38,000. If you choose to go to an elite school and you can't get financial aid, or you need an advanced degree for a money-making profession like law or medicine, you'll soon see it can be a lot more than that. Student debt is a huge drag on someone's ability to build up their personal wealth, as you're starting off your professional life not even at zero, but at a negative amount. And student debt interest rates mean that if you can only choose a relatively low monthly payment plan, you're barely going to make a dent in the amount you owe. All of your money will be covering the interest. The current federal interest rate is 6.39%, rather than the principal of the loan. One journalist, David Dennis Jr., has given up on paying off his loans. The $80,000 he racked up in school will turn into $200,000 in payments thanks to an 8% interest rate and the length of his repayment plan. Not to mention, using any leftover money to pay down debt means that you can't save up to invest in assets, especially the one that used to help most American families build up wealth: a home. Now, the counterpoint usually brought up by older people falls along the lines of, "I bought my first house when I was 26 working as a waiter. Why can't you?" But things actually aren't that easy for millennials and Gen Z trying to work their way up to homeownership in today's economy. In 1984, the median annual household income in the U.S. was just over $22,400, while the median home sale price was $78,200. So an average home was around 3.5 times a household income. By 2022, the median household income had gone up to just under $74,600 per year, while the median home sale price was now $433,100. In other words, 5.8 times the average annual household income. According to the income rules many realtors go by, that means as of 2022, an American household needs to make above $100,000 to buy an average-priced home in their city. And in some of the nation's biggest cities, they'll need to make 3 to 4 times that. That's partly due to housing shortages. As of 2022, the U.S. has more than 3 million homes short of the demand from would-be home buyers, which is why browsing Zillow has become the millennial version of reading fantasy novels. The shortage is caused by a combination of factors. There's the labor shortages needed to build them, NIMBY policies blocking new construction in existing neighborhoods, and the high cost of materials thanks to global supply chain shocks and inflation. Rising interest rates haven't helped matters. After over 2 decades of relatively low interest rates on home mortgages, the rates got jacked up to combat the inflation caused by pandemic relief efforts. This led to current 30-year fixed-rate mortgage interest rates hovering around 6.76%, almost double what it was in 2016. That means that not only do people need much more money available to buy a house, as they'll be paying higher interest rates on mortgages, but empty nester boomers and Gen X, who would generally be downsizing at this point, are less likely to go buy a new expensive property for a much higher interest rate. So they continue to live in their paid-off homes, keeping it off the market and worsening the housing shortage. People's inability to buy a house and invest in property that's going to appreciate makes a huge impact on how much wealth you can build in your life and how much wealth your children and grandchildren can build. Homeownership itself helps people build wealth by giving them the ability to take out loans against their property that they can use to invest or build up something of their own. A report by the National Association of Realtors found out that by 2023, middle-income homeowners had accumulated $122,100 in wealth due to an average of 68% appreciation in their property value since 2012. NAR chief economist Lawrence Yun says a monthly mortgage payment is often considered a forced savings account that helps homeowners build a net worth about 40 times higher than that of a renter. In the meantime, the potential of renters to build a path toward homeownership is becoming more and more bleak. In 2022, renters in the U.S. spent an average of 30% of their income on rent, a record high that's only continued to rise. According to Bremer Bank, that's led to a 70% increase in the wealth gap between owners and renters in the last 3 decades. Now, people born rich have an obvious advantage when it comes to becoming rich themselves: money. But being born into a wealthy family actually gives you a lot more advantages than that. Starting with financial literacy. Many rich kids are having meetings with their parents' financial advisors, given small portfolios to manage, and get interest and dividends from a young age. They're told exactly what financial instruments and loopholes can help them accumulate wealth before they've even graduated high school, which is perhaps why MoneyZine found that 58% of Americans who earn over $100,000 are financially literate. On the other hand, financial literacy among the general population is at an all-time low. And without a team of business managers, advisors, and lawyers to tell most people what to do and how to plan out their financial future, who can blame them? That's why only 28% of Americans with an income of less than $25,000 are financially literate. After all, it's not like managing your finances is taught in most high schools. Most people graduating college can't even fully explain how mortgages or IRAs work. Gen Z has the lowest overall financial literacy rate, with only 38% knowing anything about investments. Not knowing what you're doing is a big problem. A survey by the World Economic Forum found that 40% of people who choose not to invest, implying those who have some money to do so, don't invest because they don't know how. 70% of people surveyed said they'd be more likely to invest with better financial education. Well-off parents are using that financial literacy to set up their kids for life in another way as well, by building up their credit score. One 2019 poll by creditcards.com found that 8% of 1,500 American parents surveyed had their children added onto their credit cards as authorized users. This was to game the system and to help them build up their credit. Many of the kids didn't even know that they were on their parents' cards, but that good score was building up for them regardless. Those same parents will also be able to co-sign loans with their kids while their peers are still trying to raise their score above a 600. This is called piggybacking, meaning when people get a good credit score by piggybacking off someone else with good credit to build up their own. And as economist Yingli Toh shares, it's just one of the many ways in which the credit score system in general favors consumers that come from more privileged backgrounds, from high-income households, and from predominantly white neighborhoods. On the other hand, for people with no wealth or assets, building up credit can be a minefield. It's almost impossible to get approved for credit cards with any decent limit. Renting a decent apartment becomes an uphill battle, and if you do get a credit card, you'll be offered way worse interest rates than someone with good established credit, since you are considered more of a risk. That means that if you can't pay off the full amount in any one month, you'll get dinged more than a person with more money and a good credit score. In other words, you'll be punished for being poor. The other advantage that rich kids have over others when it comes to eventually attaining wealth involves access to better education starting at the very beginning of a child's life. According to the World Bank, there is a clear global link between education and earnings. On average, each year of primary and secondary schooling boosts future income by about 9.1%. But in many countries, particularly rich ones like the US, the returns on education aren't the same for everyone. A New York Times report found that 6th graders in the richest school districts are 4 grade levels ahead of students in the poorest school districts. If by the time you've entered middle school, the wealth of your neighborhood has already determined if you're jetting ahead or being left behind, it becomes really hard to make up that gap later in life. The Center for Economic Policy Research analyzed intergenerational earnings and concluded that the main driver of intergenerational earnings persistence are differences in investments received during childhood, which subsequently leads to improved cognition and more years spent in education. Then, people born into money have another major advantage: the opportunity to attend one of the world's best colleges. Because while getting a general college degree might not make that much of a difference in earnings anymore, while saddling you with debt, getting an elite college degree almost certainly will. Less than 1% of all American college students will ever attend one of the nation's 12 most elite universities, the 8 Ivy League schools plus Stanford, Duke, MIT, and the University of Chicago. Yet, 12% of Fortune 500 CEOs are alumni of those schools, and among the top 0.1% of earners, 13% hold degrees from one of them. And it's not just because the rich get better grades, though that certainly is part of it thanks to more resources, support, and access to tutors and SAT prep. Harvard's Opportunity Insights Group conducted research that showed for applicants with the same SAT or ACT score, children from families in the top 1% were 34% more likely to be admitted than the average applicant. Those in the top 0.1% were twice as likely to be admitted as the average applicant. Though the study didn't fully explain the gap in admissions, it pointed to items like legacy applicants, kids whose parents went to the school, and universities' desire to forge relationships with potential large donors. Other experts suggest that subconscious bias toward considering wealthy candidates better suited may also play a role. So too is the fact that wealthy kids had more money and support for extracurricular activities and other distinctions that could impress admission boards. But no matter what the reason, university admissions policies essentially amounted to affirmative action for the children of the 1%, whose parents can earn more than $611,000 a year. Most depressingly for those coming from middle and upper-class families, this lopsided admissions process does nothing to help their acceptance at all. In fact, just the opposite. Children from middle and upper-class families were less likely to get accepted into an elite university compared to the average applicant. Children from the poorest families were actually more likely to be admitted than the average applicant, but only because so few applied in the first place. Most never had the chance to build a competitive application. Many qualified low-income students lacked the confidence to apply at all, and overshadowing it all was the biggest barrier to entry: the staggering cost of attendance, which shuts out countless working-class and low-income families before the process even begins. These universities are expensive, more than your salary expensive. The annual tuition for Harvard University for the 2025-2026 school year, including room and board, is almost $87,000 per year. So assuming that number doesn't change at all during the 4 years of your attendance, that means you will owe over $347,700 to the university, or rather the student loan company extorting you so you could go to the university. But don't count on your tuition not changing at all. In 2015, Harvard's tuition, included room and board, was $58,600. That's almost a $30,000 increase for annual tuition over just 10 years. Wealthy kids have a huge leg up when it comes to the massive interpersonal networks from their family and top-tier elite universities. Half of the reason for going to an insanely expensive elite university in the first place is to be able to access their generally successful alumni network in order to smile your way into a job. One paper on Science Direct looked at the literature on the subject of networking in elite universities. It found that higher educational institutional networks, often overlooked, have significant power in connecting graduates to the labor market. And these networks are powerful because, as CNBC reported, according to research, 80% of jobs are filled through personal and professional connections. In fact, 70% of all jobs aren't even published publicly, so you can pretty much only get hired for them via networking. Connections play such a big role in life and future earnings. A study published in Nature found that poor children with wealthy friends were able to obtain an average income later in life that was 20% higher than kids from their same socioeconomic class without wealthy friends. One thing is clear: the idea that becoming rich is all about being the smartest or hardest working is quickly crumbling around the world. And this is evident in the country that promoted it the hardest of all, the USA. This is reflected in the sharp decline of social mobility in the U.S. The nonpartisan research center Opportunity Insights found that more than 90% of children born in 1940 earned more than their parents did. But those born in the mid-1980s only had a 50% chance of doing so. Today, the Brookings Institution found that only 6% of children born to parents with family income at the very bottom move up to the very top. Though the opportunities people have to move on up in life are generally decreasing throughout the rich world, the U.S. has got it especially bad. According to World Population Review, it was ranked 27th globally in social mobility in 2020, sandwiched between Lithuania and Spain. Hardly a big win for the home of the American dream. So what does this mean for people on the ground? Well, in the most socially mobile country, Denmark, it takes the average person born into a low-income family 2 generations to reach the mean average income. In the United States, it takes 5. Instead of your grandkid doing well, your great-great-great-grandkid will get by just fine. Maybe. And it's not just that it's hard to break into the top. It's hard for the richest to fall to the bottom level as well. When looking at the richest 25% of people in U.S. society, the World Economic Forum further found that less than 10% of them had low-income fathers. On the other hand, almost 50% of them had notably high-income fathers. Both stats and real-life examples show us that becoming rich is not just about discipline or hard work, it's about access to wealth, to credit building, to assets, to connections. For many people, obtaining real wealth isn't just challenging, it was never meant to be within their reach to begin with. If you think modern billionaires have it made, just wait until you learn about the richest man that ever lived, or check out this video instead.